In this video, we will be discussing IIFE or Immediate Invoking Function Expressions in JavaScript, different ways to define them, and each benefits are explained with maximum real-world examples. I think most of you would be surprised when I say with IIFE we could swap two numbers efficiently or override existing JavaScript functions, etc. Most of us are underestimating the IIFE. So let's find out what is so special about this expression. In previous video, we have discussed JavaScript closure. Hope you have mastered concepts related to closure and scope chain. Now before getting into IIFE, quickly revising what we have learned about JavaScript functions will be helpful for the rest of the discussion. There are two ways to define a function. First of all, we have function declaration, which is defining the function with the keyword function and a name. Inside the function, for now let's print this a function declaration. Now let's call the function here. Now the second way of defining a function is function expression. So here we have the function 2. Into it we can pass this function expression like this. Inside the function we'll be printing function expression. Let's call the same here. One of the main difference between function declaration and function expression is that in this function expression the name is optional. We are not passing a name for this function explicitly here, and such type of functions are called as anonymous functions. While defining a function declaration, name of the function is a must. If I remove this function here, you will get this error. Function statement requires a function name. So function name in function declaration is a must. Now let me try something new here. I'm gonna call this function immediately after defining the function here. As always, in order to call a function, we'll be using a pair of parentheses like this. Now to avoid this error, let's uncomment this function invocation here. See, without calling this function here, this function is getting called with this expression here. So immediately after the function, we call the function, and that's how this message is printed. This is what we call immediate invocation of function expression, abbreviated as IIFE, also known as self-executing anonymous functions. There are some benefits to doing it. We will discuss that in a bit. Before that, let's discuss various ways to define IIFE. In order to make it easy to pronounce, we call it as IIFE. Now inside this left-hand variable here, if there is a return value from this function invocation, it will be assigned to it. From now onwards, it's not a function, it contains the return value from this function invocation here. So that's why we are having this error while invoking the same as before. Inside the variable, we'll be having the value undefined because the function is not returning anything. See? So that's a way of defining and invoking the function immediately. Now this is not how we normally define an IIFE. Of course this is an IIFE, but we use another similar kind of syntax. So let me get rid of this from here. Here we have the function declaration. Let me remove this function invocation here. Let me try to do the same like we have done with function expression. Now if you add a pair of parentheses like this expecting to invoke this function, it won't, because this is a function declaration, not a function expression. In order to convert this into a function expression, we just need to wrap the function with a pair of parentheses like this. See, the function is getting executed. Here we have the output from this print statement here. So this is how we normally define an IIFE. Naming this function is not a problem, but if you invoke the same outside the IIFE, it won't work. This is an expression. The values inside the expression can't be used outside it. So why not remove the function name from here? Now it became an anonymous function. So that's why if we got another name, self-executing anonymous functions. Now instead of enclosing this function with a pair of parentheses like this, we can use any unary operator as a prefix. Just remove these parentheses here. Now you can use any of the unary operator, plus, minus, child, but the common alternative is this not or negation operator. Its effect is same as before, defining and invoking the function immediately. When we consider this unary prefix with the previous wrapping with a pair of parentheses, we are saving a character or a byte. You could say it's a baby step towards minifying the code. For those who don't know Minify in JavaScript, HTML or CSS, it's a process of reducing number of characters in the program, aimed to reduce the file size and thereby reducing the application load time. But if you find someone doing it without for a good reason, you could say he's really trying to impress you. I'm just kidding. You choose what fits you. Now it is possible to pass arguments to the function expression here. Suppose here we have a parameter input, and inside the function I would say IIFE your input, and let's print the passed input here. Now it is printing undefined since we are not passing a value to this parameter here. Now let's pass the argument 3. You see here we have the output. Now it is accessing the argument that we have passed and it is printed inside the console here. So that's all how IIFE works and different ways of creating the IIFE. Now you might be thinking what benefit it could have by calling an anonymous function immediately after its definition. So this is where all the basics that we have learned so far becomes helpful. So let's discuss the benefit of IIFE or IIFE with appropriate examples. Mainly there are 4 benefits of using IIFE. Avoid polluting outer scope, prevents memory leakage, implements modular design pattern, and finally minify and reduce scope lookups. Now let's look each of these benefits one by one. First of all, avoids polluting outer scope. As we introduce more and more variables or functions into a scope, naming them with a unique and meaningful name becomes difficult, and it will get more worse when we unintentionally or by mistake overwrite an existing variable or redefine an existing function. It is very common when you are working in a big project. Maybe these variables or functions are created in other files by other developers. Now to quickly demonstrate you the same, here we have 2 script files. First one is this script.js itself, and here we have the second file which is script2.js, and both of them are added into this index.html with 2 separate script tags. Now inside this script.js, let me get rid of this. Instead I will paste this program here. We have 2 variables, first name and last name, and here we have the function get full name to combine both first name and last name. Now let's check whether these variables or functions are accessible from our second script file here. Before doing that, I will just print the message here from file 2. Now back to our source tab here, let's put a breakpoint in this line here in second file. So expand this. So here we have the file script2.js. Let's put a breakpoint here and let's reload the application again. Now you could see the scope for this application. We have 2 scopes, script and global. All of us are aware of global scope, but this script scope here will contain the variables that we have defined in our script files. We are running these JavaScript codes within the script file that is added into this index.html here. So whatever variables that we have inside these script files will be added to this script scope here. As you know, you can directly run JavaScript code within the script tag of the HTML. So whatever variables declared directly into this script tag here will come under this global scope, and the variables declared within these script files here will come under this scope script. But there is an exception for var variables. If you are defining var variables inside these script files here, it will come under this global scope here. If you want to see the same, let me change this var. Let's save this and reload this application. So currently these 2 variables are var variables and this function is const. Const and let variables or functions will be there inside this script scope. Let's reload the application now. See, currently inside this script scope we only have the function get full name because it is defined with the keyword const, and rest of these 2 variables, var variables, will be there under this global scope here. See, here we have the first name and last name. So nothing related to IIFE. I just want you to know how this script scope works. So let's change this back to let. Now back to our script2.js file here. Let's reload this application again. So as you can see, the variables that we have declared inside this script.js is there under this scope script. Now let's define another variable, full name. Save this. Let's reload this application again. See, the new variable is also added to the same scope script. Independent of where these components are defined, they are accessible across these two files here. That makes the rest of the problem. So this first file will be managed by one developer and this is managed by another developer. As you can see, inside the same scope we have a function to return the full name from first name and last name that is declared in this first script file, and here we have the second file with this variable full name. As you can see, the contained scope is already polluted. Now this will get worse when we modify or override the existing variables declared in other file. Problems like this will arise if we are not treating it properly. So let me save this and reload this application again. Let's put a breakpoint here and let's run up to the. As you can see, the first name is updated to ASTF. It was initialized with this name here, which is updated inside the second file here. Problems like these will arise as this scope get bigger and bigger. Now in order to prevent this from happening, one way is to enclose the whole code within an IIFE. So here we have the IIFE. So here we have the anonymous function. Now let me copy this and pasting here inside the second file. Now let's enclose the whole code with this IIFE. So everything is trapped within an IIFE. Let's do the same inside the second file also. Now whatever variables or functions declared inside this IIFE can't be accessible outside. Let me save this and reload the application here. Now this time you could see a different scope which is local. It is referring to the local scope or the function scope of this anonymous function of the IIFE. Now with these assignments here, we can't override these variables here. So that's how IIFE prevents the pollution of contained scope. This is often implemented in JavaScript libraries. For example, jQuery or underscore. For those who don't know, these are popular JavaScript libraries created to make JavaScript development more easier and productive by introducing their own methods. For example, here we are at the jQuery download page, and let's download the jQuery file here. So this is how a Minify source code looks like. Now let me select all of these codes here. Now let's unminify the library here. So I will go to this website unminify.com. Let's paste the code here. Now click on this unminify button here. Let me copy all of this and let's paste the same inside a new tab here. As you know, jQuery is a big library. As you can see here, it consists of around 4,000 of lines of code. After collapsing the big session inside the library, the entire library can be seen here. And here we have the IIFE to wrap the entire library. Here we have the anonymous function from the IIFE and the arguments for these parameters are passed here. So as a first argument, the window global object is passed. As a second parameter, here we have the large function which is taking most of the lines of code from the source code, and it is accepted with this second argument t here, and later in the code it is called here. So that's how this IIFE works. Now back to our topic. Whatever variables or functions defined inside this library does not pollute the project where it is imported. So that's the one reason behind enclosing the JavaScript libraries with an IIFE. There is one more reason for wrapping a library with an IIFE. We can get into that in a bit. Now let's talk about the second benefit of IIFE, which is preventing memory leakage or early release of memory. So back to our script file here. When we create variables or functions, there will be memory slots allocated to them in the form of either the value of the variable or the closure of the function. It is made sure that the memory slots allocated for them must be available as long as these components are necessary for the program. But when we use IIFE, the memory allocated for the variables or functions inside them will be released into free space immediately after its invocation, because those components won't be available outside the IIFE here. So for procedures or set of instructions which are only meant to execute at once, IIFE would be the best choice because it will prevent the memory from getting more and more obese. Let's try an example of swapping two numbers. Here we have two variables num1 and num2. They are initialized with 5 and 8 respectively. Now we have to swap these variables here. That means we have to assign num1 with 8 and num2 with 5. So first of all, we'll print this initially num1 and num2. Now let's try different methods that we already know for swapping two numbers. So the first method is using a temporary variable like this, temp, and first of all I will assign it with num1 because we are going to assign num1 with num2 then after that the previous value of num1 will be lost. So first of all, we'll save the value of num1 to temp. Now we can confidently assign num1 with num2. Now let's assign num2 with the previous value of num1, which is inside this variable temp. Now let's check whether it is working or not. Let me duplicate this line here. Now let's move this to the last line here. Finally, see, the values from the variables are interchanged. So this is one way of swapping two numbers. In one of our previous sessions, while discussing destructuring assignment syntax, we have learned a new way of swapping two numbers, which is creating an array like this with num1 and num2. Now we will be using the destructuring assignment like this: num2, num1. So the value from num1 will be assigned to num2, and then num1 will get the value from num2. So this is a simple way of swapping two numbers with destructuring assignment. For those who don't know how destructuring assignment works, I have given the session link in video description and inside the iCard top right corner. Now let's do it using the IIFE. So this is how I create an IIFE. We have two pair of parentheses, and let's add the anonymous function here. So here we have the function expression. Instead of this, you can also use an arrow function like this. Now for this anonymous function, we have two parameters, a, b. Now this is what we do. Into this anonymous function, we'll be passing arguments as num1 and num2. So the value from num1 and num2 is copied into these parameters a and b respectively. Now we just need to do this. Num1 is equal to b, and then num2 is equal to a. See, it is working perfectly fine. I'm not saying this IIFE way of solving this problem is better than this destructuring assignment here. I don't know which one is better. I didn't test the benchmark. Even though we are creating two parameters for this anonymous function, the variables or parameters inside the anonymous function will be discarded immediately after invoking the function here. So this is how we can make use of IIFE for procedures or set of instructions which are only meant to execute at once. Now let's talk about the third benefit of using IIFE. It helps to create modules like we implement with modular design pattern. In previous video, while discussing JavaScript closure, we have briefly explained how modular design pattern works in JavaScript. First of all, inside the index.html, we'll be importing the script.js file like this with this attribute module. Here we have the counter.js file. From that, we have exported this function increment with these keywords export default. So the exported function can be imported with an import statement like this: import increment from the given path. And we can call the function increment like this. We can mimic the same with immediate invoking functions in JavaScript. For example, let me print this sample my plugin program here. So here we have the IIFE. Within it we have this anonymous function. One of the important aspects of modular pattern is that it helps to expose the necessary parts and keeping the other components private inside the module. See, inside this counter.js file, this function is a public function because the same function can be imported anywhere inside the application. But inside this counter.js file, we can have any number of private variables or functions which are only accessible inside the file here. The same can be achieved with an IIFE like this. Here we have a private variable and a private function. From this, we are only exposing these functions here, public function 1 and public function 2. So this IIFE will be immediately invoked here. So this returned object with these two functions is assigned to this variable here, my plugin. Now from now onwards, you can treat this my plugin as a module. From that, we can only access these public functions, function 1 and function 2. And this is the second reason for wrapping the entire JavaScript plugin like we have seen inside this jQuery plugin here. So inside the library there will be functions or variables, both private and public. Only public methods or variables will be exported. In jQuery, everything is exported with this name jQuery. So once we import the library, everything can be accessed with this name jQuery. In short, we commonly use this simple $simple like this. So that's how IIFE helps to create modules like this. Now let's discuss the final benefit of using IIFE: minify and reduce scope lookups. Let me get rid of these codes here. Now suppose we are enclosing our code with an IIFE like this. Here we have the anonymous function. So far in our previous sessions, we have been using this log statement so many times. Now I just want to reduce the number of codes that we write for this statement. So I'm going to provide a short version for this, like an alternative name. So let me copy this and I will pass this as an argument to this IIFE here. Now let's remove this. Now instead of this, we just need to use log. So from now onwards, in order to print anything into the developer console, we just need to call this function log, and let's pass the message here. See, it is working properly. So inside this IIFE, we can use this function log as an alternative to this console log function here. So this is a simple example through which we can reduce the number of codes that we write. So it can be treated as a step towards code minification. Once you learn DOM modification with JavaScript, the method document.getElementById is a common function. You can provide an alternative name for this method like this console log here. Now let's keep this aside. I will just comment this. We'll get into this later. Now let's check how IIFE reduce scope chain lookups. While discussing JavaScript closure, we have talked about scope chain. Consider this program here. We have the outer variable or global variable x, and then the parent function outer function. It has a variable y, and then the inner function with z variable, and then the parent function with the variable y, and then the inner function with the variable z. Inside this nested function, we are trying to print the value of x. Now this program can be transferred to this scope chain here. The nested function, inner function with z, then outer function or parent function with y, global scope with x. Now the same can be represented like this. We are accessing the variable x, which is actually defined in global scope. Now JavaScript engine has to map this x variable to its definition. So first of all, it will look whether the variable is defined inside the nested function. No, there is only one variable z. Then it will go to the immediate outer function, which is the parent outer function. There is no variable with the name x. Then it will go to the immediate outer scope, which is global scope. There we have the variable x. So this is what we call scope lookups. To avoid this scope lookups, we can use IIFE arguments. Let's check how it works. Now for this anonymous function, I will be adding this parameter global. Into it, I will be passing the value window here. So this window is the global object in client-side JavaScript programming. And we are assigning the same into this parameter global. Since we are wrapping the entire code with this IIFE, we can access window with global like this. So whenever JavaScript engine see global, it is directly mapped to the window object so that it can reduce the scope lookups up to the definition where it is defined in the JavaScript library or the implementation. And there is one more benefit of using this alternative name global for this window here. As I said, window is the global object in client side. When you work with the server side Node.js application, where the global object is named with the same name, global itself. So when you work with server side or client side simultaneously, so you can avoid the mistake of referring the global object, since everywhere the global is mapped to the global object, whether it is client side or server side. Now to even simplify this name, you can even pass G here. And for the same reason of reducing the scope lookups, we provide direct mapping with these global objects like document, which is a common object when you work with DOM handling. We will be getting to that while discussing DOM manipulation, means modification or altering the HTML elements with JavaScript. So in those situations also, we are mapping this global object document directly with this parameter like this. Document, you can provide the entire name to reduce the scope lookups, or you can pass simple variable names like G, D, etc. While discussing jQuery, I have mentioned that the entire library is exported with this name jQuery, and the same is simplified with this shorthand symbol here, $, which is already defined inside the library. Now to reduce the scope lookups, we just need to do this. jQuery is mapped to this $, so that you can avoid the scope lookups. Now I hope you understood how IIFE helps to reduce scope lookups. Now finally, let me show you how to override an existing function in JavaScript with IIFE. So here we have the function console.log. For example, I will extend this function console.log with an additional feature. That is, along with printing the message, I just want to append the date and time of executing that statement here. For that, we can define a function like this here, function, and this function accepts a single parameter, say message. Inside the function, we will call the original function console.log. Whatever message passed to this function will be printed. As a prefix for this, we will be appending the date and time. So I will do this new date. To format the same, I will just call this function to local time string. Now let's separate them with a colon like this. Boom, it is working fine. See, whenever we call the function log, it will call this function that we have passed here, because we are passing this function as an argument to this log here. So the message, whatever we pass here, will be accepted with this parameter here, and the same is prefixed with the date and time at the time of executing this log statement here. So with IIFE, we can extend or override an existing function. So that's all about IIFE. In next video, we'll be discussing what is happening in JavaScript engine when we run a JavaScript program. If you found this video helpful, please consider subscribing to this channel CodAffection. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues. See you in next video.